Except for some test areas, I haven't purchased any lime or fertilizer in several years. And I'm not pulling a quickie. That includes manure, compost, whatever. And I think if you watch Growing Deer, you know that our food plots are very productive and we're growing bucks with big antlers and our does are producing a lot of fawns. It's the time of year when a lot of food plot farmers are checking out their input costs, cost of seed, fertilizer, whatever. And I'm getting a lot of emails from folks that are very shocked. Fertilizer prices are literally about twice what they were this time last year. If you haven't priced fertilizer yet, one need not look any further than the headlines to see that prices are way up. Just to confirm, I checked the prices of 10-10-10. I believe that's probably the most common fertilizer used in food plot applications here locally. And sure enough, it was way up. Now I believe most serious food plot farmers will apply about 400 pounds per acre of 10-10-10. That's not some random number. I actually looked at university research and looked at the nutrients needed to produce a kind of a low marginal crop of wheat, or 40 bushels per acre. Now it sounds like a lot, but in the ag world, that's not much wheat. Now remember, to produce 40 bushels per acre, you got to produce some forage along the way. So kind of a moderate, maybe good for a food plot farmer, forage production, 400 pounds per acre. Let's see how that stacks up. The least expensive 10-10-10 I found locally was at Walmart. And it's about $146 to get 400 pounds. And that doesn't include my time driving there to get it or out here and applying it. That's just going there and buying it without taxes. $146 per acre was the least expensive price I found. Remember, 10 pounds of product doesn't equal 10 pounds of nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium. Those elements aren't pure, so it takes more than a pound of product to make a pound of nitrogen. And of course you have nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium. And there's always filler in pelletized fertilized product. That may be limestone and higher dollar stuff, or simply sand or something else that gives it enough volume so it can be carried and spread. 10-10-10 means 10 pounds of nitrogen per 100 pounds of product, 10 pounds of phosphorus for 100 pounds of product, and 10 pounds of potash per 100 pounds of product. As you would expect, the research results varied a bit from university to university on what's required, what nutrients are required to produce a bushel of wheat. I found that Michigan State was kind of in the middle, and their research showed that it took 1.2 pounds of nitrogen for each bushel of wheat produced, or 48 pounds of nitrogen to produce a 40 bushel per acre crop of wheat, or a pretty decent stand of forage. Unless there's already nitrogen in the soil, and there may well be from duff on top of the ground, from past crops, been on the farming technique, or what have you, but unless that's there, 400 pounds of 10-10-10 does not provide enough nitrogen to produce a 40 bushel per acre crop of wheat. 400 pounds of 10-10-10 means there's 40 pounds of N, 40 pounds of P, and 40 pounds per K. 40 pounds of each of those elements. Penn State's research shows it takes about 0.7 pounds of phosphorus to produce a bushel of wheat, and about 2 pounds of potash to produce a bushel of wheat. We commonly call it potassium, it's really potash. So under this scenario, 400 pounds of 10-10-10 per acre to produce a crop of wheat, you're looking at almost enough nitrogen, 40 pounds versus 48, more than enough phosphorus, but not near enough potassium. And I'll go back to Liebig's law of the minimum. German scientists way back when that come up with this formulation that's still true to today, that plants or animals are limited to the least available nutrient. So if you've got plenty of nitrogen, plenty of phosphorus, but you don't have enough potassium, the role potassium plays in plant growth and even cell structure is going to be limited, and therefore that limits the growth of the entire plant. If your food plot establishment and maintenance techniques are based on applying synthetic fertilizer, and that certainly can work, then you need to know how much is required to produce the crop you grow and how much is currently in the soil. And that's where soil tests comes into play. Soil tests are based on chemistry, Most of them are based on an acid, so you send in a sample soil and they use an acid and see how much those elements leach out. The better tests are water-based to see how much water brings those elements out of the soil. But standard farming is, I'm going to use an acid-based test, I'm going to send a soil sample in, and that's going to tell me how much synthetic fertilizer I should add. And certainly that can work to produce a crop. In this example we've been using, it would have been better to do a soil test and realize I need a bit more nitrogen for the crop I want to grow, not as much phosphorus and way more potassium, and then get a fertilizer blend to meet that recipe. That way you're not paying for too much phosphorus, and those monies can go towards the more potassium that you need. It's always best to do a soil test rather than guess. It's really not that simple. For example, nitrogen is extremely volatile, and lots of research from different universities show that if you put your nitrogen out all at once, you don't do a split application, put some out in your plant, put some out 20, 30, 40 days later, depending on your process, that about half of that nitrogen you paid for, you hauled out there, you spread, is going to volatilize. It's either going up in the air as a gas or leaching with water through the soil profile and running out into a stream somewhere. So you paid for it, you carried it, you spread it, and half of it's leaving the field. Not only is that leaving the field and becoming a pollutant, but your crops aren't going to grow as much as they could because that nitrogen is gone. I mentioned that I haven't paid for any lime or fertilizer of any sort in many years. And I learned long ago that, the air we breathe is about 79% nitrogen, and above every acre in the air is about 35,000 tons of nitrogen. Right here, free for the taking. I often refer to the process we use to establish food plots or even manage native vegetation as the release process, releasing creation's potential to make the place better, to grow bigger deer, to stop soil erosion, release creation's potential to have the best property you can have. Part of the release process is simply using that source of free nitrogen that's in the air. Some of the nutrients plants need that are here aren't available in a form plants can take up. And there's an exchange going on where plants trade carbon. They produce carbon as part of photosynthesis and trade that carbon in the soil, through the roots, through microbes for the elements they need. As an easy way to illustrate this, most of us know that we need to inoculate legume seeds, clovers, alfalfa, bean. We may not know what that inoculant is. It's simply peat moss that's been infected with or microbes added to primarily of the rhizobium family. Clovers need one member of the rhizobium family to infect their roots and then trade or make nitrogen available to that plant. The microbes do this work, the plant's simply the host. Now, rhizobia used to be present in almost all the soils, but tillage and allowing too much air in the soil and erosion has killed those family of bacteria in some areas, and that's why we need to coat the seeds. If you're doing a pretty good food plot project like we are here, and you're no-tilling or you're taking care of your soil, and you've grown that species of clover recently in the last year or two, there's probably plenty of those bacteria in the soil, and you can skip the cost of that inoculant. Be careful if you think it's not there, because inoculant is very inexpensive compared to everything else we do to establish a food plot. Nitrogen's not the only element that plants needs that's freely available. For example, most plant material on average is about 2% phosphorus by dry weight. So this milo stalk right in front of me, it only weighs a few ounces, but about 2% of that is phosphorus. Now, how much phosphorus is needed in this 1 square foot where that's going to fall over, decompose, whatever? And that's not counting the clovers, the cereal grains, the brassicas that's growing right below the stalk of milo. So those roots are actively taking phosphorus out of soil, using some, deer consume some, deer defecate some back out. I'll let this crop grow up very mature, drill right through it, and then terminate this existing crop with a crimper. Let that slowly decompose, and that's the perfect slow release fertilizer for my next crop. let's say it's a cold spring, maybe it gets dry, and my crop doesn't grow really well, and it only produces 2 tons of dry weight by spring planting season. 2 tons of forage, stems, whatever, of dry weight by planting season. Well, that's 80 pounds per acre of phosphorus. That's enough for most crops, assuming there's none left in the soil. And just like there's all that nitrogen in the air, good soil scientists tell me that there's about 10,000 pounds of phosphorus per acre throughout almost all of the whitetails range. It's just not in a plant available form. Remember, when we do a soil test, it's measuring what acid leaches out of the soil. There's all kinds of phosphorus in here, but it's not detected by those tests. These simple facts make it easy to understand why the process we use, we call the release process, has resulted in saving us a bunch of money and produces high quality crops with minimal effort.
Growing Deer is brought to you by Bass Pro Shops and Cabela's. Also by Green Cover Food Plots, Winchester, Lacrosse Footwear, Moultrie Mobile, Fleet Outdoor Apparel, Morel Targets, RTP Outdoors, Fourth Arrow, Hunt Stand, Scorpion Venom Archery, Case IH Tractors, Burris Optics, G5 Broadheads, Prime Bows, and Redneck Hunting Blinds.
Sometimes we get emails asking about lime, and lime can be very important if your soils have been degraded in the past. Remember, no one was spreading lime when bison and elk covered North America. And they were doing just fine. The early explorers just report untold numbers of those critters roaming around. When you've got plants decomposing and working in the soil like that, they tend to neutralize the soil to a very favorable pH for plants to grow. If you oxidize that, you disc it, allow all that oxygen to get in there, that favors bad bacteria, which breaks down that organic matter, that plant material really rapidly. Then one of the acids they produce will make that soil more acidic. And by the way, synthetic fertilizers like 10-10-10 are very acidic. The more of those you add, the more lime will be required. Microbes interacting with plants and all that exchange is some pretty detailed biochemistry. And probably the best explanation is a presentation on YouTube called Carbonics by Keith at Green Cover Seed. And I gotta tell you, it's widely acclaimed, and I believe the best presentation on the topic because it's presented in a way that food plotters like me can understand it. If you'd like to learn more about what's really happening in soil and how easy it is to improve the soil where you hunt or manage, just simply check out the link on the screen or the one in our description. I gotta tell you, if I'd have met Keith earlier and watched that presentation a time or two, I could have saved a lot of tuition in college and probably ended up learning more. If you'd like to learn more about the steps of the release process and even more details, on the screen, or if you're watching YouTube, in the description, we'll share links to where we get a thorough explanation of that topic. Growing food plots doesn't have to be expensive. There are easy ways to save a bunch of money on lime, herbicide, fertilizers. And it may not start the first year. You may have to start slowly, depending on how degraded the soils are where you're doing food plot farming. But I promise you, if you follow the right steps in a couple years, you'll be amazed at the improvements in your soil, of course your deer herd, and reduction of cost of establishing those food plots. If you like this subject, you'd like to learn more and even see examples from some of our friends' property, then send us an email or leave us a comment so we know that y'all like to dig deeper into this subject. And if you really like it, I encourage you to share this with a friend. Learning how soils were created to function is a great way to learn more and enjoy creation. But even more importantly, I encourage you to be quiet and seek the Creator's will for your life. Thanks for watching Growing Deer.